السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد، يقول الله تبارك وتعالى في كلامه المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: ونادى نوح ابنه وكان في معزل يا بني اركب معنا ولا تكن من الكافرين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, you have probably heard the term Generation Z, Generation X, the millennials, the greatest generation. That's also an era that's referred, according to the social studies of the United States, those who were born from 1901 to 1927. When we say the greatest generation, we are referring to the Sahaba. But anyhow, you have the baby boomers. Baby boomers is that generation that was born after World War II from 1945 to 1965. And then you have Generation X, which was born from 1966 to 1980. This is referred to as Generation X. And then the millennials are those who were born from 1981 to 1996. This is known as the millennials. And then Generation Z are those who were born from 1997 to 2012. Now you're saying, what does this have to do with Quran and Sunnah? Yes, you've heard these terms before, but you've probably also heard generation gap. What is generation gap? Generation gap is where the attitudes and behavior of one generation is so different from the previous generation that there is conflict and tension between the generation, between the baby boomers and Generation X, between Generation X and the millennials, between the millennials and Generation Z, Gen Z. And that conflict and tension leads to a breakdown of communication and lack of cooperation between the generations. Now there are differences between generations. Why? Because each generation has its own unique set of circumstances in which they are brought up. They have their unique challenges. So we don't expect the successive generation to be a ditto, a photocopy of its previous generation, but to have such wide differences, such huge differences in attitudes and behavior that it brings conflict and tension to the point that there is a breakdown of communication and cooperation. If we look, I'll give you two examples from the Quran. One is Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam. Father and son, there's a huge age difference. They say Ibrahim alayhi salam was 86 years old or older when he had Ismail alayhi salam. But when it comes to building the Kaaba, there's no lack of cooperation, is there? There's full cooperation because father and son are both building the house of Allah together. Two things I said. This is according to the definition that is given: lack of cooperation and breakdown of communication between the generations. I'm giving you two examples where there is full cooperation and full communication between the generations. An example of full cooperation I gave of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam building the Kaaba together. An example of full communication between father and son, between two generations, is Yusuf alayhi salam mentioning his dream to his father. There's a huge age difference because Yusuf alayhi salam was very young. He had 10 older brothers. But when it comes to mentioning his dream, he does not go to his friends. He does not go to his peers. Who does he go to? He goes to the Father. There's communication, and he mentions his dream. Inni ara fil manam, and Inni ra'aytu ahada ashara kawkaba wa shamsa wal qamara ra'aytuhum li sajidin. Now, question is, what are the causes and the factors of generation gap? Generation gap did not exist pre-industrial revolution. There are some reasons that the sociologist will give for this generation gap, and it is hurting the fabric of society. It is hurting society in general. Because if the son is not communicating with the father, there's a breakdown of communication, and he is going to his friends when he should be going to his father, then can his friend guide him? His friend, that's a classic example of a blind leading the blind. The person who is in the proper position to guide the son is the father. Generation gap is hurting society. Yes, in the olden days, with or without Islam, there was no generation gap because the father was a farmer, the son had no choice, was a farmer, grandson was a farmer, great-grandson also became a farmer. But there are causes that sociologists will give for why there is generation gap. Social mobility. Rarely is it that the son chooses the same profession as his father nowadays. But from an Islamic perspective, there's many factors for this generation gap, which is harmful and hurtful to society, to the fabric of society. But from an Islamic perspective, I'll give you two causes for generation gap. Do you have the definition of generation gap? Right? Drastic differences in attitudes and behavior, which leads to conflict and tension between the generations, and this conflict and tension leads to lack of or breakdown of communication and lack of cooperation. The number one cause, or one of the from an Islamic perspective, is the segregation by age. We have segregation of gender in Islam. There's healthy interaction between the genders, but generally speaking, we have a segregation between genders. That's not what I'm talking about. Segregation by age. Segregation by age is not encouraged in Islam. I'm not talking about the 5-year-olds. Those are kids. I'm speaking about the youth and the adults. In the era of Jahiliyyah, before Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam arrived on the scene, there was segregation by age. That is why when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned the tables of the social order, he brought a huge social upheaval. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, the youth and the other. The Sahaba, they could not fathom this. Because imagine, they're still from the old world, old social order. And it's hard, change is hard. That is why again and again you see the Sahaba on different occasions objecting to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's decisions. Not objecting, but raising questions. For example, Usama bin Zayd, radiyallahu anhu. He's only 17, and he was made Amir, chief commander of the armed forces. And who is under him? Who is under him? Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu. And who is under him? Umar radiyallahu anhu. Who made Usama bin Zayd the Amir? Some of the Sahaba, they said, "O Nabi of Allah, what's happening?" Because they were used to what? the old social order where there was segregation by age. Umar radiallahu anh included Abdullah ibn Abbas in the advisory council. Abdullah ibn Abbas, a young Sahabi, is sitting with the elders. And people objected. Why? Because of their old habits. Old habits die hard. What is this youth? Kalka chokra. What is this youth sitting amongst the elders? And Umar radiallahu anh, to demonstrate why he chose Abdullah ibn Abbas, a youth, to sit with the elders, asked a question and no one was able to give the answer except for Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anh. So Umar radiallahu anhu's decision to include Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anh was based on merit, meritocracy, those who deserve. So yes, we do have youth activities. We do have youth activities, and those are specifically for the youth, and it is to address their concerns, because they do have some unique concerns that are different from the adults. But it does not mean that the youth are excluded from the adult activities. Any adult activity that happens, any event or program that happens in the masjid for the adults, the youth should be without question part of it. The youth without question should be part of it. So the youth don't have to wait for a youth activity, an activity that's specifically geared towards them. Because now if you do that, then you have segregation by age. That was the way of the Jahiliyyah, segregation by age. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam put the youth and the adult to work together. Because if you separate them, and it happens also in our social get-togethers, the youth are not sitting with the adults. How will they learn? When they are sitting together, integrated as one, then they will learn from the adults. And the adults will have a chance to hear their concerns. Another reason for generation gap, from an Islamic perspective, is the sense of superiority that the latter generation might have concerning the former generation. That we have it better, we are more technologically advanced, we know how these gadgets work, and our fathers, our grandfathers, they live in a different world, they come from a different world. I remember the time when you had to get out of your car to open the garage. There was no garage door opener. How many remember that era? Right? You remember that time? Imagine, there's a blizzard, and my father would say, go open the door. We remember the time where there was no microwave. We remember the time where there was no cell phone. And initially when the cell phone came out, only the doctors could afford it. It cost $1,800 and looked like a brick when the cell phones first came out. Anyhow, but remember one thing. Each successive generation being more technologically advanced than the previous generation is nothing new. This happened from the very first century of Islam. So that is not a reason to have a superiority complex. As a matter of fact, from an Islamic perspective, the most superior generation is which generation? The generation of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, based on a hadith. خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said the best generation is not the baby boomers, it's not Gen Z, it's not Generation X, it's not the millennials, it's not Generation Alpha, it is my generation. خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then the one next, then the one after it. In other words, tabi'een. Not the Sahaba, but those who came after the Sahaba, immediately after the Sahaba, known as the Tabi'een. So you have Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba as the most superior generation, and then the next, and then the next. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this for 3 generations. The best generation is my generation, and then the one after, and then the one after. But if we were to take this on a continuum, if Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to continue this, what would he say? Then the one after, then the one after, then the one after, then the one after, then the one after. In other words, each successive generation is further and further away from the true Islam. So if there is any superiority of generation, it is the earlier generations. Now, what to do? There are things that both the elders and the youth can do. One, for example, is the elders must have respect for the youth. What did I just say? Not love and affection. That is there without saying. But respect. Yes, the elders must respect. We don't tend to respect the younger generation. We demand respect. But respect is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. If you give respect, you will get respect. You will gain respect. To have empathy for the younger generation. To feel what they are feeling, the challenges that they are facing. As a matter of fact, the challenges that they are facing is not by choice. They did not choose to come to this country. You chose to come to this country. And they are suffering from the choice that you made. They are suffering from if they are facing the social evils of drugs and this, that suffer. Yes, from a materialistic point of view, yes, this is the land of opportunity, it's the land of butter and honey. But the social challenges, the social evils that I'm speaking of, that they have to face and confront is because of the choice that you made to come to this country. So to have a little empathy for them and to understand what they are facing. And when you give them responsibility, when you give them respect, you give them choices, they will definitely make mistakes. But to make room for mistakes and allow them to have those mistakes. Some things the youth can do to overcome the generation gap is, again, respect. Respect, respect, respect. Respect for the elders, yes. If we look at in the Quran, Nuh alayhi salam, when he is addressing his son who is a mushrik, Nuh alayhi salam addresses him with Ya Bunayya irkab ma'ana. Father is a prophet, son is a disbeliever, but the father is addressing him with love and respect. Ya Bunayya. The son of Nuh alayhi salam never in the Quran, not once, addresses his father, Ya Abati, oh my father. Ibrahim alayhi salam, his father is a mushrik, Azar. But how does Ibrahim alayhi salam address his father in the Quran? Ya Abati. It's the hallmark of a believer that he has respect, even for his mushrik children, offsprings, or grandparents. Ibrahim alayhi salam addressing his mushrik father, Ya Abati. Nuh alayhi salam addressing his mushrik son, Ya Bunayya. Respect and love both ways. And another thing a youth can do is to understand that it's not all about the individual. There is a huge emphasis on the individual, whatever makes the individual happy. And this is a topic on its own. What does Islam say? The correct balance between individual rights and group rights. Individual rights and group rights. A healthy balance between the two. But it's not all about you, what makes you happy, what what you want, but it's also about the extended family, what is good for the family. Individual rights versus group rights. So to think a little bit outside of just me, I, myself, and my instant gratification, and what brings happiness and joy to me, but no, what brings happiness to the family? What is good for the family? This is something the youth can do. And to learn from the elders. You know, a blind person, he's not aware of social etiquettes. A blind person does not know that you're not supposed to pick your nose in public. He will pick his nose. Why? Because he has never observed with his eyes social etiquette. He has to be taught, he has to be told not to do this. A lot comes from observation. How to behave, how to make decisions, how to handle challenges. This you will learn from your elders. May Allah Azza wa Jal remove this generation gap from the Muslim Ummah, where we both, the previous generation and the next generation, learn and benefit from each other, communicate with each other, and cooperate with each other. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ. Please pray your sunnah.